East 2, Ancient East Vanished, the final chapter, is a sequel to the first East game, which takes place directly after where that game leaves off. A couple weeks ago, we covered the first game in a quick retrospective, so this video is going to be a follow-up to that. If you haven't seen that video yet, we do highly recommend you do so before watching this one, because as one would expect, being a direct sequel, this video naturally spoils a lot of the first game. Plus, the first one also goes into detail on some brief history and background info about the East series that I'm not going to repeat here, so there's that as well. And like the original video, this one is also going to be about the Chronicles Plus version of the game. Now with that said, assuming you're all caught up to speed, let's pick up where that one left off with this retrospective over East 2, Ancient East Vanished, the final chapter. Like I briefly mentioned just a bit ago, the story of East 2 begins right after where the story of the first one ends. To give a brief recap, Adol defeats the evil Dark Fact, collects the 6 books of East, and brings peace to the land of Asteria, ridding it of all of its monsters. From the top of Darm Tower, a couple of goddesses then materialize in front of Adol and transport him to the ancient floating land of East. East 2 then begins with the girl from East, named Lilia, seeing Adol fall from the sky and then taking him back to a place called Lance Village. It definitely has a similar beginning to the first East game in regards to the whole person coming across Adol and then taking him back to a nearby village thing. It's an easy setup from a gameplay standpoint, so I get it. Anyway, it turns out the girl that found Adol, Lilia, is actually pretty sick and needs some medicine in order to survive. Unfortunately, not only are some ingredients needed for the medicine in the first place, but the only person who can even make the medicine is trapped in some nearby mines. Being the courageous and kind dude that he is, of course Adol volunteers to save the doctor and find the ingredients that are necessary to concoct the antidote. Throughout this whole ordeal, he learns more about the legend of East and even comes into contact with some goddesses who ask him to save the land from evil. He must travel to Solomon's Shrine to do so. However, in order to get there, he first must trek across the ice ridge of Noltia and the fiery moat of Burnbless. And this brings me to the first aspect in which I think the second game improves upon the original, which are the varied locations this game has to offer in comparison. The first game pretty much just had some grassy fields,
How original.
mines, some ruins, and of course, Darm Tower at the end of the game. East 2, on the other hand, has all of that, plus a snowy, icy mountain to hike up, and a cool volcano location that even has a town inside of it. Okay, I guess in retrospect, it really only has those 2 new different types of environments, but I don't know. To me, I felt like it did a lot in fleshing out the world and making it feel like a grander, more epic adventure. Speaking of grandeur, pretty much most things are increased in scope for the sequel. This includes the level cap going from 10 all the way up to 55, an increased number of weapons, armor, and shields that you can equip, and generally just more dialogue and cutscenes related to the story. The biggest change they made to East 2 though was definitely the addition of a magic system. There are 5 different types of spells you gain access to throughout the game. However, the fire spell is really the only attack-based one, which you get very early on. It adds a whole new dynamic to battles, and is pretty much the only way you can even damage most bosses. In some ways, it kind of ruins some of the balance in which the bump system was designed around, but it also adds some nice variety to the gameplay, which I think makes it a little more fun, balance issues aside. For the most part, I also thought the bosses in East 2 were an improved experience. They're more unique and cooler to look at for one, especially compared to a group of bats for example. And overall, they're just not as annoying to fight and a little more fair, I think. Honestly, some of them were maybe a little too easy though, as there were some bosses near the end of the game that I actually found myself beating on the first try, which never happened with the first East game. Not to say they weren't difficult, as they definitely were, but in comparison to the first game, they just felt a little more manageable. Or maybe I just got better after getting my ass kicked repeatedly in the first game. I don't know. Either way, I thought they were more fun. The final boss was kind of a letdown though, and I do think the first game was better in that regard. The battle against Dark Fact was absolute chaos and provided a real challenge. There was no way to heal mid-fight, so you really just had to practice your strategy and execute it nearly flawlessly. Due to the difficulty of the battle, it gave me an extreme sense of satisfaction when I was finally able to beat him. Unfortunately, I didn't really get that same feeling or satisfaction when beating the final boss of East 2. The shield magic and elixir combo really make the fight a joke. Shield magic constantly drains your NP at a pretty rapid pace, granting full immunity to damage, all while doing so. And the elixir revives you with full health and NP whenever you die. By equipping these both, you're immune for the first 30 seconds of the fight, allowing you a lot of time to take off a significant chunk of his health. When your magic finally runs out, you're still given a good amount of time to keep damaging him before your health reaches 0. Even when it does though, the elixir just revives you back to a full set of health and a full set of magic, so you can pretty much just repeat that whole strategy again. If your level is high enough, you can beat him before your magic even runs out for the second time, or at least not too long after it. So yeah, if you do this, the fight is made pretty trivial and is completely lacking in challenge. While we're on the topic of petty grievances,
why'd I do it? Because I'm petty.
I wasn't really a big fan of the final dungeon, Solomon's Shrine, either. It suffers from a lot of the same issues I had with Darm Tower from the first game, and maybe even worse in some aspects. The worst things about it are definitely its length and all the backtracking that it requires. Like, it's no exaggeration to say that the whole last half of this game, or at least the last 40% of it, takes place around this dungeon. It almost negates the compliment I gave the game earlier in the video about the varied locations, as you just spend way too long here. The amount of time you spend here compared to the amount of time you spend in all the other environments in this game is just really disproportionate, and I wish they would have balanced it better. The dungeon itself isn't bad from an artistic direction at times, but it gets really old, really quick, having to backtrack through all the same locations over and over again. Not to mention, it's pretty confusing to navigate through as well. A map really could have came in handy here. To help make all the backtracking in this game a little more bearable though, luckily Falcom throws us an awesome soundtrack to blast in the background, and it's just as good as the first one. I'm still amazed at the quality of music in these first 2 East games, as I've heard they were good, but I didn't know they were this good. The song from the Ice Ridge of Noltea and the song that plays during Ramia Village, Tender People, are probably my favorite new tracks in the game. Tender People in particular is super chill and relaxing. Whenever I was in that village, I really took my time doing what I needed to do just because I loved hearing that song in the background for as long as I could. The main theme of the first 2 games, Fina, also has a really great alternate edition in this game as well. Overall, it really is just a fantastic OST from top to bottom. And for the most part, I would say the same thing about East 2 in general. Is it a perfectly balanced game or as strong as some of the later entries in the series? No, but that doesn't mean that it's not an enjoyable enough experience in its own right. These games just have a lot of charm, soul, and a great sense of adventure to them that make up for some of the aspects that are a little rougher around the edges, to put it nicely. The incredible music and the simple yet fun combat is just icing on the cake. Though with that said, the combat in the series gets much better from here. The next East game we're going to cover in this retrospective series, Oath in Felghana, is a remake of the original East 3 and has some of the best combat in the entire series. I'm really excited to dive back into that one, so be on the lookout for that video when it comes out sometime within the next couple weeks. Other than that, thanks for watching this video everyone, and we hope you have an awesome day. This is Gaming Productions. Until next time.